The wind pushed dust down the main street of Dry Creek, a small town half alive and half forgotten. A lone rider came slow along the trail, his hat pulled low, poncho frayed at the edges, eyes hidden in shadow. He looked like a man carved out of stone, and whether a figure who had ridden through too many towns and buried too many memories to care about another. His horse was tired, its ribs showing faintly under the hide, and its steps left shallow prints in the powdery earth. He did not plan to stop here. Towns had never given him anything but trouble, cards played with too much suspicion, whiskey poured with too little welcome, and guns drawn quicker than the blink of an eye. Yet something in Dry Creek made him pause. Maybe it was the silence of the place, the way shutters banged in the wind, while no one came out to fix them. Maybe it was the church bell rusting in its frame, never rung for weddings anymore, only for deaths. At the edge of town he saw her. She was small shoulders tense beneath a faded shawl, hair pinned loosely in a way that spoke of exhaustion more than style. Beside her clung a boy, no more than 8 barefoot clothes patched and thin. The woman lifted her eyes, and in that glance there was both defiance and desperation, like a candle fighting the darkness. He would have ridden on. He always did. Strangers' troubles were none of his business. But the boy whispered something, tugging her sleeve, and the woman stepped forward, blocking his horse's path. "Sir," she said, voice unsteady but clear, "please, you don't know me, and I don't know you, but I've run out of choices." He reined in, eyes narrowing under the brim of his hat. "Choices run out for everybody?" He answered, his voice low, rough as gravel. She swallowed hard. "They want my land. My husband's gone 3 years now. The ranch was all he left me. But Clay Mercer and his men, they've been circling like wolves. They'll drive me out or worse. I can't fight them alone. My boy deserves better than a mother who just lies down and lets them take everything." Her words hung in the hot air. The boy clutched her skirt, staring at the stranger with eyes that begged and feared at once. The drifter looked past her to the dusty street. 2 men leaned against a post outside the saloon watching. They wore pistols like decorations, smirking as if they owned the town already. He knew the type: mercenaries hired muscle for men who counted cattle the way kings count gold. "Lady," he said finally, "I'm not your savior. I don't settle down. I don't fight another man's war. I'm just passing through." Her face tightened, but then her eyes softened in a way that broke through the armor he wore inside. "You may not believe in saving anyone, but I believe you stopped here for a reason. Even a man who's given up on the world can't ride past a child who'll lose everything." The boy's hand slipped from her dress and reached up toward the stranger's stirrup, small fingers brushing leather worn smooth by years of travel. For a long moment, nothing moved but the wind. Then the drifter sighed as if the weight of the whole desert had settled on his shoulders. He swung down from his horse boots, thudding in the dirt. "Where's your place?" he muttered. Her breath caught half relief, half fear. "Just outside town toward the cottonwoods." He nodded once. "Let's go." As they walked, he could feel the eyes of Mercer's men on his back. He did not need to turn to know they were smiling with the kind of confidence that came from numbers and cruelty. He had faced it before in towns just like this, and he knew the story rarely ended clean. The widow, her name he learned was Sarah, led him down a trail that wound between brittle fences and dry fields. Once this land had grown wheat tall enough to feed half the county. Now weeds and dust choked it. The house was small walls, cracked porch sagging. But it was still standing, and it was still hers. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and stale bread. Sarah poured him water, her hands trembling as she set the cup down. The boy sat at the table, eyes wide as if watching a hero step out of the dime novels he sometimes found discarded at the general store. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "If you stay one night at least, maybe they'll think twice before trying something. Mercer respects a gun, even if it isn't mine." The drifter drank slow, then set the cup aside. "Mercer won't respect anyone who blinks. Men like that only understand fear." She looked down, twisting her fingers. "Then what hope do we have?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the door, opened it, and looked out at the fading horizon. The sun burned low, casting long shadows that stretched like claws across the land. He knew Mercer's type, and he knew they wouldn't wait long. As the night fell, he sat outside on the porch, cleaning his revolver with the quiet patience of a man who had done it too many times. Sarah lit a lamp inside the warm glow, spilling out onto the dust. Her voice floated soft through the cracks, murmuring to her boy, promising that maybe this stranger would keep them safe. He listened without meaning to. Something in her tone tugged at a place he had long buried, a memory of gentleness. He thought the frontier had burned out of him. He shook it off, set the revolver down, and lit a thin cigar, watching the smoke curl into the darkness. From the cottonwoods came the faint sound of horses, low voices, muffled laughter, the clink of spurs. Mercer's men were coming to test the widow's strength. The drifter exhaled smoke, slow and steady. Then he stood rolling his shoulders like a man preparing for another storm he could not avoid. Behind him, the boy's voice whispered through the door. "Mama, is he going to help us?" And though the night wind carried the words away, the stranger heard them heavy as a promise. The horses came in slow at first, like shadows testing the edges of lamplight. Then the riders split around the cottonwoods, 4 of them easy in the saddle and cocky, in the way men get when nobody has told them no for too long. Their laughter drifted across the yard as they reined up near the porch, boots scraping, stirrup spurs whispering. The leader wore a slick black vest and a smile that fit like a scar. He tipped his hat without respect. "Evening, Miss Sarah," he said. "Heard you found yourself company. Not much courtesy to take in a stranger when your neighbors are still waiting on a friendly conversation." Sarah stood in the doorway with the lamp behind her, the glow outlining her thin shoulders. The boy pressed close to her hip, eyes wide. The drifter stepped off the porch, keeping a few feet between himself and the men. He did not posture. He did not raise his gun. He only stood as if the ground itself had asked him to be patient. The man in the black vest looked the drifter up and down. "Name's Cal Roper," he said. "I work for Clay Mercer. We've been trying to help the lady here make a sensible decision, but I can see you might have opinions." "I'm all ears, friend." The drifter's voice came low and plain. "Your boss wants something that ain't his." Cal's smile thinned. "Now that depends on how you read the law. See, Mercer's got notes due on this land. Her late husband took loans from Mercer's outfit to ride through the drought years. The papers say if she can't pay, Clay gets the deed. Simple and clean." Sarah spoke quiet but fierce. "My husband never signed that last paper. Mercer's man forged his name. We all know it, but the judge owes Mercer his office and his cattle feed. So the truth falls where the money tells it to." Cal chuckled. "Your mouth is brave, miss. But bravery doesn't fix arithmetic. Debt is debt." The drifter looked past Cal to the others. They were bored. That meant they had done this before. A visit at night, a tilt of the head, a threat too sweet to be called a threat. Push a little, see who pushes back, and if no one does, take the land at dawn. He had watched this story in other towns. Sometimes he had tried to change it. Sometimes he had failed. He took one step forward. "You carry messages, Cal. Here's mine. Tell Mercer he doesn't ride this fence tonight. The lady and the boy sleep. If Mercer needs to talk, he can come in daylight." The men on the flanks shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward pistol butts. Cal's smile vanished. "Friend, I think you misunderstand the schedule. We said it, not you. And I don't like strangers twisting my boss's calendar." The drifter's hand stayed at his side. He kept his eyes level, not on Cal's gun, not on his mouth, but on that small triangle of space between a man's breath and his decision. "Go back," he said. Cal let the moment breathe. Then he tipped his hat lower. "Boys," he said, not loud, not soft, just enough. The first rider on the left nudged his horse forward, reaching for the drifter's shoulder as if to shove him off the porch steps and into the dust. The drifter's hand moved in a short, tired arc learned over years of hard lessons. He caught the wrist, twisted and pulled. The rider tumbled from the saddle with a grunt, hitting the ground in a clatter of spur and curse. The others went for iron. 2 shots cracked so close together they sounded like a single door slamming. The drifter's revolver spat once, then again measured and sure. The second rider yelped and dropped his gun, hand bleeding. The third froze, eyes wide at how quick it had gone wrong. Cal's pistol cleared leather, but he hesitated that fraction of a heartbeat. Men waste when they meet another man who has no use for theater. The drifter's barrel lifted to Cal's chest. The yard fell silent except for horses blowing and the wind scratching at the cottonwoods. The boy behind the door gasped and then swallowed it back the way a child does when he learns fear has rules. Cal stared down the cold circle of the gun. His jaw flexed. He flicked a glance at the man on the ground, the one hissing through teeth and clutching a wrist that might not bend right for months. Then Cal laughed once, humorless, a single breath. You're fast, he said. And that's inconvenient. Ride, the drifter said. Cal slid his gun back into the holster with a slow calm a softer man would not have found. We'll ride. I'll deliver your message. And Clay Mercer will deliver one back. Daylight like you asked. We're gentlemen after all. He wheeled his horse. The others followed, nursing pride and pain, casting looks over shoulders that promised the next visit would not be a test. Dust rose and vanished in the dark. The drifter didn't move until the sound of hooves faded. Then he set the hammer down and slipped the revolver into leather. He turned to the doorway. Sarah stood there, still, knuckles white around the lamp handle. The boy stared at him like a man might stare at a lightning strike that chose a different tree. You should leave, she whispered, though everything in her voice said the opposite. Now that Mercer knows you're here, he won't let you just go. I was never good at leaving, he said. Not when things look like this. She swallowed. Thank you. He nodded once, as if thanks were a coin too heavy to carry. We've got hours till dawn. You and the boy should rest. That night he sat on the porch again, while the lamp inside dimmed and Sarah's quiet voice blended with the creak of timbers settling. The stars were sharp. Coyote howls ran along the distant draws like ragged threads. He counted the sounds of the night the way a soldier counts steps, keeping time with breath and memory. He did not sleep. In the gray of morning, Sarah came out with coffee in a cracked enamel mug. She did not ask how he took it. There was only one way here, dark and hot and honest. He drank while she watched him with a mix of worry and something softer that she seemed to fight. Cal Roper, said Daylight, she murmured. What will Daylight bring? A train of confidence, he said. Men horses of paper somebody expects you to sign. Your own fear dressed in a suit. And you, she said, what will you bring? He looked past her to the fields. Enough. The boy Tom came out with a stick and pretended it was a gun. He kept a careful distance from the drifter while circling him as if gravity had changed. Mr. the boy said, were you in wars? A few, the drifter said. Did you win? The drifter thought about towns he had left behind, graves without markers, rooms that had gone quiet when he walked in and quieter when he walked out. Sometimes, he said, they ate bread hard as fence posts and eggs thin as pennies. Sarah set plates down like offerings. She talked about fences that needed mending, a pump that coughed more than it drew, a fence-lined creek that used to sing when winter thawed. He listened without comment, but the words lodged anyway. By mid-morning, a ribbon of dust rose on the road from town. The drifter stood. Sarah's fingers found the back of a chair and held it like it might keep her from falling. Tom took 2 steps toward the yard and then remembered something. Maybe courage, maybe a mother's warning, and darted back to her side. 6 riders came, not 4 this time. Cal Roper was at their head face, calm eyes keener than last night. Behind him rolled a buckboard with a clerkly man in a suit hat, narrow mouth, smaller still. Beside the clerk sat a thick fellow with a shotgun laid across his knees, as if it were a pet he meant to introduce to the family. They pulled up in a neat line that said they had practiced this sort of visit until it felt like manners. Cal tipped his hat. Miss Sarah. Gentlemen, we have come with Daylight as promised, and we brought papers as required. Clay Mercer likes to see things tidy. The clerk hopped down and smoothed the front of his coat. Mrs. Carson, he chirped. I represent Mr. Mercer's interests. We can forgive certain penalties, extend generous terms, and ensure your boy receives a small stipend if you agree to sign the transfer of deed. No, Sarah said, her voice steady in a way it had not been last night. My husband did not sign away this land, and neither will I. The clerk frowned like a man correcting grammar. He opened his case and produced a paper with lines and seals that glinted. Mrs. Carson, I am afraid your refusal only complicates matters. The drifter stepped off the porch. Complicate them, then. Cal's horse shifted, and Cal laid a hand on its neck, soothing. Friend, you made your point last night. You're quick and brave. But now it's business. Let the lady sign and we all go home. The drifter's eyes slid to the shotgun man and back to Cal. You brought a lot of home with you. Cal's smile reappeared, a little weary, almost respectful. I'm a practical man. I don't like surprises. Neither do I, the drifter said. The clerk cleared his throat. Mrs. Carson, if you do not sign today, the sheriff will enforce the court's order by week's end. The sheriff works for Mercer, Sarah said. Like you do. I work for order, the clerk sniffed. The drifter took one more step down into the yard. Order is what bullies name their fear. Silence held for a fragile beat. Then Cal sighed. I was hoping to keep this polite. He lifted 2 fingers. The shotgun man shifted the barrel a hair's breadth. The drifter's hand fell to his side again, loose, almost lazy, but his eyes sharpened like glass under sun. Sarah drew Tom behind her. The air felt tight, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting to see which word would turn into a bullet first. Cal leaned forward in the saddle, voice low. Last chance, friend. Stand down. Let the lady sign. The drifter looked at Sarah, at the boy who hid and watched through fingers. He saw in a flash, too quick for words. The same corner of the world he had avoided all his life, a piece of ground that wanted a man to belong to it. His jaw tightened. She's not signing, he said. And with that, the day broke open. The shotgun spoke first. A booming crack shattered the still air, spraying dirt from the porch steps, where Sarah had stood seconds before pulling Tom tight against her. The drifter had moved the moment Cal's fingers twitched, throwing himself into the dust with a roll that left his revolver barking twice. The shotgun man jerked back the weapon, flying from his hands as he toppled from the buckboard. Chaos spilled across the yard. Horses reared, men shouted. Sarah cried out, clutching her boy close to the doorway. The clerks screamed and scrambled under the wagon papers, scattering like frightened birds. Cal Roper kept his seat, eyes sharp and teeth clenched, watching the drifter as if studying a puzzle he meant to solve. The drifter came up from the roll on one knee, smoke curling from his revolver. One rider pitched sideways with a hole in his shoulder. The other dragged his horse back hard, uncertain now. The drifter did not waste a third shot. He stood slowly, dust clinging to the sweat on his face, and leveled the revolver straight at Cal. Enough, he said, voice flat, calm, carrying farther than any shout. The yard froze. Only the horses stamped, blowing clouds of nervous breath. Cal's men glanced at him, waiting. Cal didn't flinch. His hand rested on his pistol, but he didn't draw. He studied the drifter the way a man studies weather, searching for the break that says when the storm will end. You're not just a wanderer, Cal said finally. You've worn iron before. You've killed before. The drifter's silence was answer enough. Cal exhaled, slow, nodding once. Pull back, boys. The wounded cursed, the clerk whimpered, but Cal's voice carried steel, and they obeyed. One by one, they turned their horses, retreating down the track in a broken column. Cal lingered last, looking at the drifter with a mixture of respect and warning. Clay Mercer won't like this. He'll come himself. And when he does, you'll wish you'd kept riding. He wheeled his horse and was gone. The yard fell into silence again, broken only by the soft sobs of Sarah and the quick breaths of her boy. The drifter holstered his revolver, eyes following the dust cloud until it thinned into the horizon. Then he turned back to the porch. Sarah was pale, hands trembling as she smoothed Tom's hair, whispering comfort she didn't feel. When she met the drifter's eyes, something wordless passed between them, gratitude, fear, and the heavy knowledge that this was only the beginning. They'll come back, she whispered. Mercer won't stop, not until he buries us or takes the ranch. The drifter climbed the steps, boots heavy on the wood. Then we don't let him. Her brow furrowed. You've already done more than anyone else in this town. Why stay? He didn't answer right away. He took off his hat, wiped sweat from his brow, set it back on. His eyes went to Tom, the boy staring up at him with awe and trust too big for his years. Then he looked at Sarah again. Sometimes a man rides past trouble, he said. Sometimes trouble won't let him. She drew a breath, shoulders shaking. I don't want to drag you into our fight. He almost smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Lady, I was born into fights. Yours just feels like one worth having. For a moment she said nothing, only held his gaze. Her lips parted as if words had failed. Then she nodded, a tiny motion, fragile but real. Then we'll stand, she whispered. The day stretched long and hot. Sarah tended. The boy tried to patch the hole the shotgun had blown in the porch. The drifter set about repairing the fence line nearest the house. His movements steady, deliberate, as if the simple work kept his hands from remembering the feel of a trigger. Tom followed him everywhere, asking questions, offering small tools, staring at him as though he were some character stepped from the stories boys tell around firelight. What's your name? Tom asked once, shy but bold enough. The drifter glanced down. Name doesn't matter. It matters to me. A pause, then soft, call me Jake. Tom repeated it, testing it on his tongue, grinning as though he'd discovered a secret. Mr. Jake, will you teach me to shoot? The drifter shook his head. A boy should learn to mend fences before he learns to break things. Tom frowned, but he kept walking beside him, proud, just to share the silence. That night after supper of beans and bread, Sarah stepped onto the porch where the drifter sat with his back to the post staring at the stars. She carried 2 cups of coffee, set one beside him. He nodded. Thanks lifted it to his lips. The quiet between them was easier than words. Tom likes you, she said finally. Boys like stories, he replied. I'm not much of a story. She turned her face toward him, searching the lines worn into his skin. You're more than you think. I see it when you look at him. When you look at me. He didn't answer, just stared into the dark. His jaw tightened as if holding back something too old, too heavy. She let it be. Sometimes silence was safer. The next morning, word spread through Dry Creek. Mercer had sent riders to Sarah's ranch, and they hadn't come back unscathed. Whispers wound through the saloon, through the blacksmith shop, through the church steps where men gathered to spit and grumble. Most shook their heads, muttering that the widow had bought herself a grave. But a few, just a few, felt a stir of shame that none of them had stood beside her. In Mercer's big house at the edge of town, the cattle baron listened to Cal's report with cold fury. Clay Mercer was a thick man, face broad and red eyes small but sharp as nails. He had built his empire by crushing softer souls, and no one had ever stopped him. Now a nameless drifter had cut his men down and left his name stained with failure. Find out who he is, Mercer growled. Dig him out of whatever hole he crawled from. If he thinks he can stand between me and that land, he's already dead. He just hasn't been buried yet. Back at the ranch, Jake saddled his horse at dawn, eyes scanning the horizon. Sarah stepped from the house, hair loose, a shawl pulled tight against the morning chill. You're leaving, she asked, fear hidden in her voice. He shook his head, checking the land. Mercer won't wait long. She stepped closer. Jake, if you stay, it will cost you your life. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. Lady, a man's life costs him something either way. Maybe it's time mine bought more than silence. Her lips parted, breath-catching. For a moment under the pale light of dawn, she saw not just a drifter, not just a fighter, but a man who had carried loneliness so long he had forgotten what it was to belong. And in that moment, something fragile and dangerous began to bloom between them. The prairie was quiet that morning, too quiet for land, usually alive with birdsong and the restless rustle of grass. Jake rode slow along the fence line, eyes alert, hand near his revolver, though he never drew it. Mercer's kind of men liked ambushes. They preferred shadows to daylight when pride had been bruised. He found a post, cut clean wire sagging where someone had clipped it in the night. Cattle tracks muddled the dirt beyond, leading toward Mercer's spread. Jake squatted fingers, brushing the broken strands. This was no accident. Mercer had begun his squeeze, pushing Sarah's herd toward his own pens under the guise of chance. When he returned to the house, Sarah was in the yard hanging wash, while Tom chased a chicken, half for fun, half for hunger. She saw his face and stopped the wet cloth dripping in her hands. They've started, haven't they? He nodded. They want to starve you out before they burn you out. Her lips tightened, but she didn't look away. Then we fight back. There was steel in her voice, a steel that surprised him. He studied her, seeing beyond the frailness of her frame, past the worry carved into her cheeks. She had a will forged in loss, and it glowed in her eyes now. Fighting's not clean, he said. People get cut deeper than they expect. She glanced at Tom, who was still chasing the chicken, laughing. Everything's already cut, Jake. If I lose this land, I lose him too. Not his life, maybe, but the boy he is. He'll learn men can steal your home, your name, and all you can do is bow. I won't let that be his lesson. He felt her words settle heavy in his chest. He had lived his life bowing to nothing, and it had left him wandering hollow. But maybe, he thought, maybe a boy needed to see one man stand so he could believe in standing himself. That evening, Jake saddled both horses and rode with Sarah and Tom to town. Eyes followed them as they moved along Main Street, some pitying, some fearful, some outright hostile. Mercer's influence weighed on every door and shutter. The saloon was loud with laughter that died when Jake stepped inside. Men turned, some slipping hands near guns, others pretending not to notice. Cal Roper sat at a corner table, cards spread before him, whiskey untouched. His eyes flicked to Jake, then to Sarah at his side, and finally to the boy peeking behind her skirt. Evening, Cal drawled. I warned you about daylight. Now you bring the widow into Mercer's house of cards, brave or foolish. Jake didn't sit. Tell Mercer I'll see him tomorrow. Out at her ranch, man to man. Cal's smile was slow. Clay Mercer doesn't come when he's called. You'll ride to him. He'll come, Jake said. Because if he doesn't, this town will know he fears one man's shadow. And Mercer can't afford fear on his name. Murmurs rippled through the saloon. A few heads nodded, men who had felt Mercer's boot on their necks for years. Cal studied Jake, then laughed once dry. You've got sand, I'll give you that. All right, stranger. Tomorrow. But when Mercer comes, he'll come with more than words. So will I, Jake answered and turned to leave. On the ride back, the sky burned red with sunset clouds like embers across the horizon. Tom rode before Sarah's small hands, clutching the saddle horn eyes wide with the thrill of it. Jake rode beside them, silent, the weight of what he'd done pressing in. He had challenged Mercer in public. There would be no turning back. Sarah broke the silence. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Her eyes glistened in the fading light. Mercier will come with men. Too many. Then we hold the ground, he said simply. She looked at him long, as if trying to see the whole of the man who had wandered into her life. Why, Jake? Why risk yourself for me, for us? He didn't answer at once. He watched the prairie stretching endless around them, watched the boy laughing at the wind. Because I'm tired of leaving, he said finally. Tired of riding past people who deserve better. Her breath caught soft, almost a sob. She reached over just for a moment and touched his arm. It was brief, but in that touch was a promise neither of them dared to speak. That night, as the house creaked in the dark, Jake sat on the porch again, revolver across his knees. The stars were sharp, the coyotes quiet. Sarah stepped out, shawl pulled close, and sat beside him. For a while they said nothing, listening to the night breathe. I used to think love was a kind of weakness, she said suddenly, voice hushed. Something that made you vulnerable, easy to break. But since my husband died, I've learned the opposite. It's the only thing that makes me stand at all. Jake's jaw worked. He looked at her, at the lines grief had drawn, at the strength rising through it. I thought love was gone for me, he said. But maybe it was just waiting, somewhere I hadn't been. Their eyes met, and the silence between them thickened. Not empty this time, but full trembling, with something dangerous and alive. She looked away first into the dark, her cheeks burning, though the night was cold. Inside, Tom stirred in his sleep, muttering a dream. Jake listened to the boy's voice and felt a strange warmth spread in his chest, a warmth he hadn't known in years. He knew dawn would bring Mercer. He knew guns and blood and dust waited on the horizon. But for the first time in a long while, he also knew what he was fighting for. And that knowledge cut sharper than any blade. Dawn cracked hard and thin, a pale light spilling across the ranch, like a blade drawn slow from a sheath. Jake was already awake, saddle-cinched rifle leaning against the porch rail. Sarah stepped out with Tom clinging to her skirts, both of them silent, both of them carrying the same dread in their eyes. In the distance, dust rose. The sound came first, hooves pounding, metal clinking, the low murmur of many voices. Mercer was coming, and he wasn't coming alone. Inside, Jake said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it was final. Stay low. Whatever happens, you keep the boy behind you. Sarah's lips trembled, but she nodded. She pulled Tom back into the house, glancing one last time at the man who had walked into their lives and chosen to stay. The dust cloud grew until it swallowed the horizon. Then Mercer appeared at its head. He was broad and thick through the chest beard, grizzled coat tailored finer than any man in Dry Creek had a right to. Behind him rode near a dozen men guns, gleaming horses restless. Cal Roper was at his side, expression unreadable. They reined in before the porch. Mercer's small eyes scanned the ranch, then settled on Jake. So you're the drifter who thinks he's a wall, Mercer, said voice heavy and booming. Walls fall stranger, always. Jake leaned one shoulder against the post, calm as stone, then push and see. A murmur rippled through Mercer's men. Mercer grinned, showing yellow teeth. You got grit. I'll give you that. But grit don't stop bullets and it don't change the law. This land's mine. She signs or she leaves. I don't care which. She ain't signing, Jake said. Mercer's grin faded. Do you know who I am? A man with too many men and not enough soul. The words cut sharper than Jake expected. Mercer's face turned red, jaw tightening. "Kill him!" he snapped. The yard erupted. Rifles raised, pistols drawn. Horses lunged forward. But Jake was already moving. His revolver cleared leather in a blur, shots cracking like thunder. One man toppled, another screamed as a bullet carved across his arm. Jake dropped behind the trough, the wood splintering under the storm of return fire. Inside the house, Sarah dragged Tom to the floor as windows shattered glass, raining like cruel hail. "Stay down, baby," she whispered, covering him with her body as bullets chewed through the walls. Cal Roper barked orders, trying to corral Mercer's men into a line. Mercer himself sat back watching with fury and strange curiosity. "He's just one man," Mercer growled. "One man doesn't stand against an army." But Jake did. His rifle barked now. Each shot measured, each movement precise. He wasn't wild. He wasn't desperate. He was deliberate, cold, steady. Years of battles no one in Dry Creek knew about had carved him into this moment. A rider charged the porch, pistol blazing. Jake rolled out, caught him with a shot that pitched him sideways, horse screaming as it bolted. Another man tried the flank, only to find himself thrown from the saddle with a bullet to his leg. The fight dragged like a storm, chaotic, loud, thick with dust and smoke. Sarah's ears rang inside the house, her heart hammering as she clutched Tom tighter. Through the cracks in the wall, she glimpsed Jake's shadow and fire, every motion balanced between life and death. Then silence hit sudden sharp. The gunfire slowed. Mercer barked for his men to hold. A dozen had ridden in. Fewer still were left standing unscathed. Some nursed wounds, others scrambled for cover. Jake stood in the open now, revolver low but ready. Dust clung to his face, sweat streaking his brow, eyes colder than any winter. "Enough," he said. Cal Roper's jaw tightened, his pistol still in hand. Mercer raised a hand to stop him. For the first time, the cattle baron looked uncertain. "Who are you?" Mercer demanded, "to stand in my way?" Jake's voice was flat. "Nobody. Just the man between you and what you want." Mercer's mouth twisted. "You can't hold forever. You'll bleed, she'll beg, the boy will starve. And when you're gone, I'll take the land anyway." From inside the house, the door creaked. Sarah stepped out, pale but unshaken, Tom clutching her skirt. She faced Mercer, chin lifted. "This land was my husband's, and now it's mine. I won't bend. Not to you, not to your money, not to your threats." Her voice wavered, but it carried. The men heard it, and something in their eyes shifted: respect, shame, uncertainty. Even Cal looked at her differently, as if seeing more than a widow for the first time. Jake glanced at her, then back at Mercer. "You see, she's stronger than all of you." The words burned Mercer's pride worse than bullets. His face darkened. His hand twitched toward his pistol. "Then I'll kill her first," he snarled. Jake's revolver came up like lightning. For a breath, the world froze. Mercer's hand hovering near his gun. Jake's barrel trained true. Sarah's breath caught tight, Tom's eyes wide as the sky. And in that fragile breath, the future of Dry Creek balanced on the edge of one man's decision. The breath shattered in an instant. Mercer's hand dove for his pistol, thick fingers fumbling with rage instead of skill. Jake's revolver barked, once the crack echoing across the ranch like a hammer on an anvil. Mercer's gun never cleared leather. He jerked back, a bloom of red spreading across his coat, eyes wide with shock more than pain. The cattle baron toppled from the saddle with a heavy thud, dust puffing up around his body. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The mighty Clay Mercer lay still, his empire bleeding out in the dirt. The yard went silent except for the wheeze of wounded horses and the rasp of men's breaths. Cal Roper sat rigid in the saddle, eyes locked on Mercer's fallen form. The other riders shifted uneasily, their courage dissolving with their leader. Jake stood steady, revolver still in hand. His voice cut through the silence, cold and unshaken. "Any man still loyal to Mercer can ride now, or you can lie beside him. Your choice." The threat was plain, but more than that, it was a release. Mercer's men looked at one another, then back at the dust where their boss lay. One by one, reins tugged, horses turned, and they began to ride away. No one raised a weapon, no one spoke. The empire had crumbled in the span of a single gunshot. Cal lingered, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed on Jake with something between hatred and respect. Finally, he dismounted, knelt beside Mercer's body and closed the man's eyes with a gloved hand. Then he stood face hard. "You've changed, Dry Creek," Cal said. "But not all changes stay clean." He swung back into the saddle, gave Jake a last long look, and rode after the others. Dust trailed them until only the stillness remained. Sarah stepped forward, trembling, Tom clinging to her. She stared at Mercer's body, then at Jake, disbelief and relief warring on her face. "It's over," she whispered. Jake holstered his revolver, shoulders heavy. "For now." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Men like Mercer don't build alone. There'll be others. His debts, his friends, his enemies. This land's worth too much to stay quiet." He looked at her, eyes softer now. "But you'll have a chance to fight on your own terms." Her eyes glistened, tears finally spilling. She reached for his arm, gripping it tight. "We wouldn't have had that chance without you." Tom looked up at him wide-eyed. "You beat them, Mr. Jake. You saved us." Jake crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze. His voice was gentle, steadier than it had ever been. "I stood so your mama could stand. Remember that, Tom? Someday it'll be your turn." The boy nodded solemnly, as though he understood more than his years allowed. In the days that followed, Dry Creek began to breathe different. With Mercer gone, his grip loosened. Farmers spoke freer, merchants no longer bent under unfair taxes, and for the first time in years, the church bell rang, not for death, but for gathering. Sarah worked the ranch with renewed fire. Neighbors who had once turned their backs now came with tools and hands, mending fences, driving strays back, helping her rebuild what Mercer had nearly stolen. Through it all, Jake remained quiet, steady, fixing what was broken, teaching Tom how to ride straighter, how to mend fence wire, how to watch the horizon without fear. He did not call it belonging, but Sarah saw it in the way his shoulders eased at dusk, in the way he lingered at the supper table, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the field, Sarah stood beside him on the porch. The boy was asleep inside, and the night was still. "You could leave now," she said softly. "The fight's done. No one would blame you." Jake's jaw tightened. He looked at the horizon, then at her. "Maybe I don't want to leave." Her breath caught. She reached for his hand, hesitant then firm. "Then stay. Not for the fight, not for the land, for us." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jake let himself smile. Not wide, not careless, but real. He squeezed her hand, the weight of years lifting just enough for something new to grow. In the heart of Dry Creek, stories began to spread. About the drifter who stood against Clay Mercer, about the widow who refused to bow, about how love and grit had turned the tide of a town. Some said it was legend, others swore it was truth. But for Jake, for Sarah, and for Tom, it was simply life, hard, raw, uncertain, but theirs. And in that life carved from dust and danger, something fragile yet unbreakable had begun to take root. The weeks passed, and Dry Creek found a rhythm it had not known in years. Without Mercer's shadow, the town began to breathe like a man shaking off a chokehold. The saloon laughter sounded less bitter. The church bell rang for weddings again, and children dared to play in the dusty street without fear of riders thundering through. At the ranch, life was still hard, but it was living. Fences needed mending. The roof needed patching, and the herd had to be tended with stubborn care. Sarah moved through the work with a strength that surprised even herself. Her hands blistered but steady, her eyes brighter each day. Tom followed Jake everywhere, clumsy at chores, but eager, proud of every small task. Jake taught him how to tie knots, how to sit a saddle without slipping, and how to watch a man's eyes instead of his hands. The boy listened as though every word was scripture. Sarah watched them, sometimes smiling, sometimes afraid of the attachment blooming too fast. One evening, she found Jake sharpening a knife under the cottonwoods, his face lit by the last scraps of daylight. She stepped close, folding her arms. "You're still restless," she said quietly. He looked up, pausing in his work. "A man who's wandered as long as I have doesn't forget how to feel the trail under his boots." Her throat tightened. "And when the trail calls again," he set the knife down, the edge glinting. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "Then I have to ask myself if I've finally found a place worth not answering." She didn't speak. Instead, she sank to sit beside him, her hand brushing his on the log. Silence filled the space between them, heavy, fragile, and full of unspoken words. A month after Mercer's fall, Cal Roper rode back into town alone. His hat was low, his horse lean from miles. He didn't come with guns, drawn only a quiet presence that turned heads as he walked into the saloon. "Mercer's dead," he told those who asked. But the world keeps moving. Don't think peace lasts forever. Yet he never raised a hand against Sarah or Jake. Perhaps he had seen enough that night to know the widow's resolve, and the drifter's steel weren't meant to be tested again. He tipped his hat when he passed the ranch, a gesture that carried warning, but also respect, and rode on. Summer swelled hot. One night thunder rolled across the plains and rain finally broke the long, dry spell. Sarah and Tom laughed as they ran out into the storm, the boy splashing in the mud, his mother's hair plastered to her cheeks. Jake stood in the doorway, watching something warm curling in his chest. When Sarah turned back, her eyes found his shining in the rain. She crossed the yard, water dripping from her shawl, and stood closer than she ever had before. "You've given us back more than land," she said softly. "You've given us hope." He reached up, brushing wet hair from her face, his hand lingering against her cheek. "And you've given me something I thought was gone." For a moment the storm hushed around them, and the world was only their breath, their closeness. Then she leaned in and his lips met hers, the kiss gentle but fierce, the kind that spoke of broken things, mended and lost things found. Tom's laughter rang in the background, pure and unburdened, as if the land itself was finally free. In the seasons that followed, Jake stayed. Not because the trail had vanished, but because he had chosen a different kind of fight. The fight to build, to protect, to love. The drifter who once believed he belonged nowhere had found himself claimed by a small ranch, a strong widow, and a boy who looked at him like a father. And though the West was still wild, though danger always lingered on the horizon, there was peace here carved from dust and fire. Peace and love that even a man of stone could no longer deny.